In wills and probate work, accuracy matters, and time is of the essence. Designed for UK private client law firms, Leap's all-in-one legal software automates wills, probate and estate administration, supporting compliance and growth without increasing overheads. Learn more at leap.co.uk.
You're listening to the Today's Wills and Probate podcast, one of the leading sources of information for the wills and probate sector. Don't forget to subscribe and sign up to our free newsletter at todayswillsandprobate.co.uk and follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter.
Hello, welcome along to the latest Today's Wills and Probate podcast. I think it's fair to say that the discussion we're about to have, you're unlikely to have heard elsewhere unless you've come across Matt in the course of your work, because today we're going to be talking about how you deal with people's ashes who want to be remembered in a particular way or want to be delivered somewhere a little bit unique. Try not to be too cryptic here, Matt, but it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about what you do in just a second. Tell us a bit about yourself. You're the director of a company called Aerial Ashes. So give us a bit of a flavour as to what that is about.
I own Aerial Ashes. Aerial Ashes, we scatter ashes by drone, which is that's all we do. That's So we're the only people in the country allowed to do this. We've got a special exemption from the CA to allow us to drop articles, namely ashes, from a drone, and we do it across the country.
I said that I would very much doubt many people have come across this. And in fact, when we were first introduced, we had a conversation, must have been about 45 minutes, and it felt like just 20 questions, Matt, because I had so many that I hope to be able to articulate through the course of the discussion today as well. But I mean, right. Number one, how on earth did you ever get involved in dropping ashes from drones?
I'm sort of standing on the shoulders of a giant of his in Chris, he was the founder. He started the business. He was a pilot in the Royal Air Force, and he was asked to scatter ashes off his helicopter one day. Now, Chris was a perfectionist, so he couldn't just scatter the ashes. What he did is he worked out a slow release mechanism from the helicopter, and he worked out how to make the ashes disperse. So ash is a bit like gritty talcum powder. As soon as you disturb it, it plumes. So what he wanted to do with his helicopter is find a way to make a large plume in the sky of the ash. So he worked out the aerodynamics of the helicopter, and he did this, and he did it really, really well, and everyone thought it was great. And he made a bit of a rod for his own back because he kept getting asked by more and more people to do this again. When they saw it and saw how well it went, he left the Air Force, and unfortunately he wasn't allowed to keep the helicopter. So he made a bit of a niche. So he spent 18 months trying to work out how to do it with a large drone instead. And that's how he sort of started Aerial Ashes. So 18 months later, he had like a very clever, what we call this, the perfect scatter. So you fly the drone in a certain way, you release the ashes quite slowly from a unique drop box, and then the ashes will plume in the sky and create a plume of ash about 100 meters wide that gradually disappears. And it's quite symbolic. I think people describe it as like seeing their loved one going to heaven very slowly and gradually in front of them. And then when he saw like the reaction people had to this, he realized that it was a business and something that it helped people with their grief, and it gave them some closure. So that's how this business started. I got involved through drone work, really. I helped Chris at a scattering ceremony in Brighton, and this lady turned up and she had the ashes of her husband, and she looked fairly traumatized. She clearly hadn't slept. And then we did the scattering ceremony, and then afterwards she was a different person. She was like, it gave her closure, and she said, I wanted to move to Cyprus, but I couldn't go because I couldn't leave her husband. And this is him going to their special place, and Brighton next to the pier was where they used to go. They used to meet and go and have fish and chips there, and he was scattered where his special place was in a really nice, dignified way. And it gave her the closure, and she literally said, I can now move to Cyprus. I've dealt with this. I was just amazed by it. I thought, Chris, this is lovely. And Chris, like, he's very polite and he's very personable, but afterwards he said, oh, they're all like that. And he was quite blasé about it, as in, not in a negative way, but that is the standard reaction. Like, the reviews we get are overwhelmingly positive because the service is unique, personal to people, but it's really nice and it's really symbolic. It's really lovely.
It's a real, almost a clash of cultures. It's a clash of kind of some of that symbolism that you've talked about, but a feat of engineering as
Hmm.
well. I mean, you describe sort of this slow release mechanism as creating this plume
Yeah,
of ash.
very much so. Yeah, and that's sort of really useful for us because it's kind of, I've had people, not in the UK, I've had people internationally try and copy what we do. And it's so obvious because they basically get a drone and a box. The box opens and it's a bit like opening a bin. The ashes just drop out and fall, and it looks terrible. So yeah, no, it took a long time for him to get it right and how he wanted it to go with the drop box. And we've continued to develop it because obviously what you can never have is the ashes coming out too soon. You can't afford to make mistakes with this. So yeah, no, it's a very clever bit of kit. It's very simple, but very clever how it works. And it's all about like the wind speed and flying in a certain way with the aerodynamics of the helicopter to create that large plume in the sky that's so symbolic and so good.
You talked about the fact that you have this exemption from the Civil Aviation Authority.
So, yeah, yes, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, there are some really interesting practicalities to this. And I remember when we sort of first chatted about it, my sort of immediate thoughts went to, you've got downdraft from the blades of the drone.
Yeah.
Presumably, you've got to take into account wind speed as well.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that people don't end up with ash in their face? I mean, there are quite a number of different factors here that you need to be thinking about. I mean, talk us through some of the practicalities of flying the drone and then, actually getting to the point where you can release the ash.
You're absolutely right. And that's probably one of the biggest reasons people use us is because they've tried to scatter ashes themselves before. What they thought would be a lovely moving sort of finalization ceremony turned into quite traumatic, that the ashes sort of hit the sea, whatever they were dancing, trying to avoid waves. The ash is plumed, it covers them, it gets in their hair. I spoke to someone last week, she said, for weeks I had ash in my handbag. Every time I went in it, I found more ash. And this is their loved ones, and she was traumatized by it. And lots of people say, I've done it once, I can never do that again. So the practicalities, it's like we've done it lots of times, and it's interesting to me, but ash and drops and plumes responds differently depending on the weather. And we've learned this over a period of time, because obviously we could never have scattering ashes on people. That would be awful. That would be disaster for us. So we're very, very careful with where the wind's going. So we know roughly where the ashes will go. We fly in a certain way to make sure that we can scatter the ash how we want it to be. We can alter the height. And the drone, it's not really about the drone. The drone just is basically a flying scatter tube. So we can fly sort of, if we want it to go further in a certain way, we can fly higher or we can fly lower. And also moisture contents in the air means the ashes, if it's quite damp, so when it's just rained and the air is really, really damp, the ash holds into the air a lot better. And sometimes it even goes up. It's quite interesting, and it's difficult to sort of read, and it's taken a long time to get it right. And obviously, we need to, if people want to be scattered in a certain place, we need to make sure that happens. So it's generally quite a lot of planning, but you can only plan so much, and a lot of it's trying to work out on the day exactly what's going on. And the wind changes as well, obviously, on a second by second basis. So there is quite a lot to it. It's not as simple as it might sound or look, but it's important we get it right.
What about the logistics of where you can scatter? Because presumably there are restrictions to being able to scatter these things. I know, for example, I've spoken to couriers in the past who courier ashes around the world, and they say that there are quite strict rules and regulations around which carriers will carry ashes, which carriers won't, that kind of thing. But equally, there must be sort of rules and regulations around where you can and can't scatter.
Yeah, no, that's it. You can't just buy a budget postal service and then hope the ashes don't get lost. So yeah, no, you need most Royal Mail don't carry ashes. Most couriers don't. We use a specialist courier if we have to move the ashes between one place or another. So legalities and practicalities. So obviously, if you scatter on someone's land, you need landowner's permission, which is completely correct. Obviously, I wouldn't want someone coming in my front garden and scattering ashes there. So we need to get landowner's permission. But what we can do is, because I suppose we scatter in such a good way and the ashes dissipate, we don't have an impact on the ground. So we've done some sort of SSI sites, we've done golf courses, really top end golf courses, race courses, football pitches, not on the pitch for Premier League teams, but a lot of them, what we're doing is we're scattering overlooking them. So the Premier League team, it's like now a blanket no. You've got no chance. They won't allow this to happen. But what we can do uniquely is we can fly where we've got landowners' permission or waterways nearby. We can perfectly lawfully scatter overlooking the pitch, which is going to be, I think, really huge because that's their special place. And that's what it's all about. It's all about people being laid to rest where they like to be in their happy place, that be their favourite beach or their golf course, or like I said, overlooking their football stadium forever. So that's very much sort of what we offer and what we can provide.
What are the best bits of the role? You mean, you've talked about some of the satisfaction you get from people not knowing what to do with the ashes and finding a route through you to some peace.
Yeah, that's very common. That I think lots of people, they lose their loved ones and they go, right, and they get a phone call, or they, right, your ashes are ready, and you go and get them. And it's quite common. They literally walk out with the funeral directors or the crematorium with ashes, and they go, no idea what they want to do with them. They end up going home. They go on a shelf, and then they go in the loft. And I've had people have gone to charity shops, and people have ended up doing house clearances and taking the ashes to charity shops, and it's not dignified. So lots of people come to us. I think the longest one is about 20 years between their loved one dying and then wanting to, or being ready to scatter their ashes. But yeah, we solve the problem. So we make it where they want it to be, however they want it to, is what we do. So yeah, no, that's very much, it's answering that problem of what do I do with my loved one's ashes? I've no idea.
And there's no kind of client type particularly. I mean, I'm trying to think whether there would be a type of client that might be attracted to this as a potential solution.
That's a really good question. I think when we first started, we thought the link would be to aviation. And I remember one of the first scatterings that I took part in, we assumed it would be an aviation link. We spoke to the lady and said, did your husband like aviation then? And she went, oh, no, he hated it. I went, oh, well, I think we're a bit taken back. I went, so can I ask, why did you think aerial ashes? She said, we just wanted to be together in the moment. We didn't want anyone to have the stress of it. We just wanted someone to take the stress off us, scatter them in a nice way, and we could all be together and we could focus on the moment. And that's very much what we do. So yeah, I think we're not about anyone in particular. We're about people's, like I said, I keep saying it, their special place where they were happy. So finding a way to scatter their ashes in a really dignified way in their special place, and it gives them that memorialization that they can go back to that site to remember their loved ones. They know where they are forever. They can sit on a bench on the beach looking out to sea and have a chat with them, and they can walk away from them, and that makes that special place the place they can remember them. And in a way, it's a lot nicer than possibly like a gravestone in a cemetery or something else. And we're getting so many people now, like direct cremations obviously it's in the funeral industry, it's quite contentious, but we're getting lots of people who want the direct cremation or book it for themselves, and then their loved ones come along later and go, but we wanted some sort of ceremony. This isn't they didn't want the fuss, but we kind of needed. And I think there's sort of psychological evidence that says having that finalization in one way or another does actually help with people, giving them that closure to the grief. So there's lots of people who sort of find themselves wondering with their loved ones having a direct cremation, they want the finalization, and we can do the ceremony and give them that. So
there's no element to what you do that's religious in any way necessarily. I mean, because, to your point about direct cremation, there's this real rise of secularism, isn't there, that people feel connected spiritually in some way, but it's not a religious spiritualism, is it? You don't particularly sort of have any religious element to what you do, for example.
Not usually. There are religions that have to have the ashes scattered in running water. So obviously that's something we can do, and there's like rivers where we can go where we can scatter in running waters for religious requirements. But no, in the whole, what we do isn't particularly religious. It's fairly neutral religion wise. I think obviously some religions don't allow ashes scattering or cremation. So yeah, obviously that's nothing we can get involved with. But we've also had vicars, we have priests doing ceremonies on the beach, so we can make it religious if that's what people want. And like I said, it's flexible, it's whatever they want it to be, and that's really important to us. It's their ceremony, their way.
If it's not too crass a question, Matt, tell us about perhaps some of the worst bits of the role, because it sounds as though it's a really interesting kind of business that you're running, but there must have been some disaster stories, or there must have been something that's gone wrong at some point.
No, I've got to say we try really, really hard to make sure it doesn't go wrong. There's been no disasters. I think one of the most frustrating parts is I guess some organisations that I probably shouldn't name, and it's not fair to name, but they're quite archaic, that have some nice grounds that meant something to people, and sometimes they're quite resistant. So we've had people who like literally volunteered for their organisations for years, and then that's their happy place, and then they pass and they want to be scattered at that location, and they sort of feel almost that it's not an unreasonable request because they gave so much to it. And then when it's from some organisations a blanket, oh no, you can't do that, I think it's quite disappointing for them and their family. I suppose that's probably the most frustrating part of it. But as far as sort of issues go, that we've there's a lot of the
Touch
issues
wood.
that could, yeah, touch wood, yeah, please, yeah, absolutely. But a lot of the issues, like with the drone, the drop box, we have processes to try and minimize the chance. So we're like, you can never say never, because it's a bit like you can buy a brand new car and you can break down on the way home from the dealership, but we always test the drone before we fly. It's like we've got a really strict maintenance schedule. We test it before we load it. We get to site, we test it. We load the ashes, we test it. So at every stage we try and make sure that if there's any issues, we know about it and can overcome it before the customer comes. Because the last thing we want to do is have any issues.
I sense this job takes you all over the country.
Yeah, we cover from Cornwall to North Scotland. So yeah, literally travelled everywhere. Yes, which is nice.
And I also sense from the way that you're describing it that there is an increase in demand for these sorts of services.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's hard to sort of narrow it down to a particular reason. I think we're getting more and more known. So there's more people. And yeah, we, like you say, not many people know us, but we're getting more and more sort of well known. With more funeral directors. We've got lots of people who sort of are putting us down in their will as an amendment, just to say this is my request, that when I go I'd like my ashes scattered. For one reason or another, some people don't have people who will do it for them, so they don't have relatives or loved ones but they want to go, and like we've got people who've pre-booked them and their sister, so when their time goes, we're going to take both sets of ashes to the Isle of Wight and scatter them together, which is what they wanted. So yeah, so I think it's difficult to know because of the marketing and because of the business growing, or because of the sort of change in the industry. But yeah, certainly direct cremation's affecting it, and that's, like I said, increasing it. And then I think, yeah, just getting more known, more mainstream. And I think as a whole, celebrations of life is a big thing in the funeral industry, making it personal, not, I guess, the traditional funeral with everyone sat in a room and singing songs is changing, and people want it to suit them and their personal thing. We've had funeral directors who wear Everton shirts, and then the ashes, then we scatter overlooking the Everton Stadium. It all fits to, that was them, and that's what they liked, and their funeral can represent them. I think it's all about choice. It's all about them, their choices, and then they can choose and make it whatever they want it to be. And that's good. That's nice.
I suggested at the start of the discussion, Matt, that it would be unlikely that many of the listeners will have come across your service particularly, but this conceptually, it's certainly a bit alien to me when we were first introduced. So hopefully listeners have learned something new today. Great to have you on the podcast. Really appreciate you joining. I mean, you've got a website that people can jump on, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. www.aerialashes.co.uk. So if anyone wants to find out more, that's our website.
Brilliant. And as I say, really appreciate you joining the podcast and talking us through some of the mechanics of what I think is something quite remarkable, actually. So yeah, thanks so much for joining and for sharing your story.
Thank you, David. Lovely.
The Today's Wills and Probate podcast is available on your preferred podcast provider. It's also available on todayswillsandprobate.co.uk. My thanks to Matt. Thank you as ever for listening, and we'll see you again soon.